superstar is about to sign a Nike endorsement deal worth $28 million.
Like, she's not the face of the league.
Who would be?
What?
Today, I'm back with another exciting and interesting video. So without wasting any more time, let's jump right at Caitlin Clark. $25 million. $25 million before she had even completed her first WNBA season. There it was, the contract. There were all the attorneys present. The entire evening screenplay had already been typed out, and the executives had their pens ready. Sign the agreement. For the cameras, smile. Raise the jersey. Make a few courteous remarks. Return home. That was the strategy. However, Caitlin did not carry out the plan. In front of a room full of media, Nike executives, and her own teammates, she performed something in a single moment that no one anticipated. She pivoted. She turned to face Sophie Cunningham. The room fell silent as a result of what she said next. There was stillness instead of cheers, applauding, or flashbulbs going off. Because it wasn't a business announcement that took place in that room that evening. There was no sneaker reveal. It was a declaration. By the end of the evening, it had completely altered the discourse surrounding women's basketball in this nation. So relax, because this is the tale of a rookie who used $25 million of her own money to accomplish something that has never been done in professional athletics. It will take some time to tell that story, but every minute will be worthwhile. Now, before we discuss what transpired during the Nike event, we must discuss something that the majority of casual basketball fans do not completely comprehend. Since the WNBA's financial situation was practically a national humiliation for decades, you might find yourself feeling a little upset for these women when you hear this portion. I'm not making this up. I'm not being overly dramatic. I'm being honest with you. In this league, veteran players, women who had dedicated 10, 12, or 15 years of their lives to playing professional basketball, were paid salaries that were insufficient to pay the rent in the locations where they were located. For many years, the average wage in the WNBA was in the mid-five-figure level. A top player's actual basketball contract could only pay her a maximum of about $250,000. For most people, that seems like a lot of money, and it is. However, you begin to grasp the picture when you contrast that with the NBA, where the minimum rookie contract is more than $1 million annually. In the offs, these women had second jobs. Actual employment. A few of them were high school coaches. In their hometowns, a few of them were offering private training sessions. One of the league's most well-known young players, Angel Ree, publicly stated that her WNBA paycheck was insufficient to pay her rent. Give that some thought. A professional athlete competing at the top level of her sport in the U.S. was unable to use her basketball salary to cover her rent. What then did these women do? They boarded aircraft. They took a plane to Europe. They took a plane to Australia. They took flights to Russia, China, and Turkey. In order to make enough money to sustain their basketball careers, they played in other leagues during the WNBA off-season, frequently in nations where they were separated from their families and homes for months at a time. Endorsement arrangements were uncommon back home in America. There were hardly any sneaker contracts. Take a moment to consider that. The most well-known figures in women's professional. If you appreciate this content, consider giving this video a like and subscribing to the channel. Believe it or not, more than 83% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. It's free and only takes a second, but it means the world to us. So, did you subscribe already? Great. Thank you so much for your support. Now back to the video. Basketball players were wearing shoes made for someone else, branded with someone else's name, and making virtually nothing from the businesses that later sold those same shoes with a substantial profit margin. Only a small number of WNBA players had their own signature sneakers for many years. In 1995, Cheryl Swoops became the first woman to receive a signature shoe. Elena Delon came next, followed by Maya Moore and Candace Parker. In 2023, Sabrina Ionescu received hers. That's pretty much the entire list. Few women have ever owned a sneaker in a league that has been around since 1997. That was the truth. That was the American women's professional basketball industry's financial situation. And in the spring of 2024, Caitlin Clark entered that world as a rookie. She then broke every single piece of it pretty instantly. Some early accounts put the sum at $28 million over the course of 8 years, although the most commonly reported figure was closer to $25 million. Not only did the Nike signature shoe contract surpass the previous WNBA record, it completely destroyed it. To put this figure in perspective, Sabrina Ionescu's multi-year, reportedly seven-figure endorsement agreement with Nike was the largest in WNBA history. Not only was Caitlin's deal larger, but it was much larger. We're discussing a figure that caused seasoned NBA players to reconsider their own contracts and question how a rookie in the WNBA could have earned more endorsement revenue in just 5 years. In an instant, Caitlin Clark transformed from a college sensation to the most marketable rookie in women's basketball history. She was no longer merely the Indiana Fever's face. She represented the commercial future of the entire league. In many respects, she represented women's sports in the U.S. Furthermore, kindness was not the cause of the enormous quantity. Nike wasn't being altruistic. It wasn't a big gesture. It was business logic, cold, hard, and indisputable. Despite her ability to shoot from 35 feet, Nike chose not to sign her. Because she had broken every scoring record in college basketball history, Nike decided not to sign her. But she also did that. Because every stadium she entered sold out weeks in advance, Nike signed her. When her name appeared on the program, television ratings would often triple or even double, which is why Nike signed her. Because apparel bearing her number was selling out so quickly that the league was unable to replenish it in time, Nike signed her. Most significantly, she attracted a whole new generation of admirers, which is why Nike signed her. They entered a sport that sorely needed them, many of them young women and girls who had never watched a WNBA game in their lives. 2.45 million people watched the 2024 WNBA draft, in which Caitlin was chosen first overall by the Indiana Fever. About 600,000 was the prior record. Before she had ever played a single professional minute, she doubled the crowd for the draft alone. The number was justified because of this. The deal became historic because of this. Nike wasn't placing a wager on a player. Nike was placing a wager on change. They were placing a wager that the woman they were signing would break through a whole ceiling in sports marketing. And they were entirely correct, as we now know. That is now the pinnacle for the majority of athletes. That's the summit of the mountain. You sign on the dotted line at that point. The press tour is done by you. You allowed Nike to create an entire. You may ride the wave for as long as it lasts by putting a marketing campaign around your face. And no one would have held Caitlin accountable for doing precisely that. She wouldn't have been questioned. Nobody would have anticipated much more from a player who was still technically a rookie, still getting to know the league, and still attempting to endure the physical abuse she was receiving on the floor every night. However, most athletes are not like Caitlin Clark. She has never been. And the whole reason we are presenting this story now is because of what she did next. Because she took advantage of the most significant financial opportunity of her professional career and gave some of it to someone else rather than simply cashing in and moving on. Not metaphorically, not with a kind speech and a pat on the back. She used a real contract, a real pair of specially made footwear, and a real plan to accomplish this. No one in the meeting, including the executives, journalists, and even her colleagues, anticipated this strategy until it was taking place in front of them. The Nike event was meant to be a standard event. The first thing you must comprehend about what transpired that evening is that a printed guest list was available. A timetable existed. Backstage, speech points were printed on cards. There were pre-planned camera angles. Nike has created a ceremonial jersey with gold stitching specifically for the event. It was an airtight, straightforward strategy. Start by playing a highlight video that chronicles Caitlin's journey from Iowa to the WNBA. Give her the jersey on stage as the second step. Step 3. Allow her to address the audience with a few polished, rehearsed lines. Take 1,000 pictures in Step 4. Step 5. Send everyone home content. Every social media network would receive the content. For 48 hours, the internet would be buzzing. Pre-orders would be placed for the footwear. The machine would continue to operate. Standard operating procedure for a significant Nike launch. This was something they had done 100 times before. The blueprint was that. Caitlin entered the venue with her typical enthusiasm. She was composed, concentrated, and totally in the moment, never feeling overpowered by the lights or the cameras. You are familiar with the type of presence I am referring to if you have ever seen her during pre-game warm-ups. Despite being only 22 years old, she presents herself as though she has been doing this for 20 years. Sophie Cunningham, a teammate, was standing next to her. Sophie now assumed she was there to provide moral support. She might appear in a couple background photos on someone's Instagram story. Perhaps Caitlin would thank her during the speech or make a brief note of her during a toast. Perhaps she would get a glass of sparkling water and a complimentary snack. She was completely unaware of what was going to happen. In that room, no one did. The venue's lights went down. After the conversation subsided to a low hum, there was complete quiet. The room fell silent as a short film began to play on a large screen behind the stage. The movie followed Caitlin's journey from start to finish. It all began during her high school years in Des Moines, Iowa, where she was already attracting audiences that most mid-major college programs were unable to fill on their best night. She was shown on video as a youngster making long three-pointers in gymnasiums that were only partially filled while local cameramen attempted to follow her every move. It continued through her illustrious tenure at the University of Iowa, when she became, statistically speaking, the most exciting player in women's college basketball history and rewrote the all-time college basketball scoring record. The movie then transitioned to her inaugural season in the Wnba. Furthermore, the movie did not sugarcoat anything. It displayed the bruising, hard fouls, and cheap shots that the referees inexplicably decided not to call. The sports network pundits who claimed she was overexposed, overhyped, and unworthy of the. She was receiving attention. The internet trolls who targeted her just for being in the spotlight, which they believed she had not earned. Before she had even properly figured out the playbook for her own squad, the video depicted the weariness, the late-night trips between cities, and the burden of carrying an entire league's viewership on her shoulders. However, the movie also presented the other viewpoint. The roar from the buzzer beaters caused stadia to practically tremble. The sold-out crowds that encircled city blocks in places where no WNBA game had ever sold out. The little ladies wearing her jersey in the stands, their mouths hanging out and their eyes gaping. Observing her perform as if she were a real-life superhero, the movie depicted the moment when the league as a whole silently came to a significant realization. There was no trend with Caitlin Clark. She wasn't this month's flavor. She wasn't a passing fad. She brought about a long-lasting structural change in American women's basketball. A Nike executive entered the stage with that gold-stitched jersey in hand as the film concluded and the screen darkened. The audience leaned forward in their chairs. Cell phones were introduced. Everyone had been waiting for this moment. This was the chance for a picture. The plan was for Caitlin to take the jersey, hold it up with both hands, smile into the lights, and let the flashbulbs do their thing. She accepted it. She grasped it. She stared at it for a beat longer than anyone in the room had anticipated. Then she turned away from both the Nike executive who had given her the jersey and the photographers. She pivoted to face Sophie Cunningham. Her voice was steady, yet each word carried a weight that tightened the atmosphere. She also mentioned something that was not included in the script. "This is not just for me," she remarked. "This is for all the women who show up, put up a strong fight, and defend her team." There was no applause in the room. There was no cheering in the room. Nobody knew what was really going on, and Caitlin Clark was far from done, so the room froze. From behind the curtain, a sleek black display case rolled onto the stage. The audience continued to struggle to understand what was happening. Caitlin extracted a personalized shoebox from the case. She didn't pose for pictures. She didn't hold it in a position. She avoided turning it in the direction of the cameras. With genuine intent, she walked it straight to Sophie Cunningham and put it in her hands. Sophie grinned. Most likely, she thought it was a present. Perhaps a kind act of remembrance. Perhaps a pair of team-colored footwear to commemorate her teammates' big night. On its own, that would have been a lovely gesture. The majority of those present would have likely recalled it as a tender moment between two friends. The box was opened by Sophie. Inside were a set of specially designed, player-only sneakers with a slogan that has characterized Sophie's whole playing career, hand-stitched in full Indiana Fever colors. "Never give up." Sophie gave them a look. She touched the embroidery with her fingers. Then she noticed something more beneath the tissue paper. A contract, folded. Not the contract for Caitlin. Sophie's agreement. Caitlin Clark had negotiated a whole different endorsement deal for Sophie Cunningham as part of her huge Nike contract. She had entered one of the most important business negotiations in women's sports history. She had informed Nike executives directly while seated across the table that she would not sign her contract until her teammate accompanied her. "Yes, let that sink in for a moment," Nike responded. "Allow it to truly land." Caitlin Clark used all of her leverage to pull up another chair in a league where every player is vying for minutes, touches, media attention, and a place at a table that hardly has enough chairs for everyone. She didn't merely give someone else the limelight. She physically enlarged the lighting so that a second woman could stand next to her inside. "You must now realize that this is not how professional athletes are active. I'm not being cynical when I say this. I am stating this because it is simply the reality of how the company operates. Leverage is crucial in professional sports. You use it for yourself when you have it. You make the most of your own contract by using it. You utilize it to get the largest portion of the pie for yourself. The game is simply played that way. The agents impart that knowledge. The financial advisors suggest doing that. For decades, the entire industry has been based on that. Caitlyn's actions were blatantly against the game's regulations. She intentionally violated the unwritten code. Sophie examined the agreement. She then turned to face Caitlyn. Then, for over 30 seconds, she remained silent, according to those present in the room that evening. She simply stood there with the box and the contract in her hands, attempting to make sense of what had happened to her life. The room finally comprehended at that point, and the stillness ended. There was some applause, but it wasn't the kind you get at a business function. It was the kind of cheering that occurs when people realize they have just seen something that they will be sharing with their grandchildren. You may be thinking, okay, that is a beautiful gesture, but why? While you sit there, why did Sophie Cunningham receive the contract, the sneakers, and the moment out of all of Caitlyn's colleagues and the women on the Indiana Fever roster? If that's the case, you haven't been watching Indiana Fever basketball this season. Because Caitlin Clark survived her debut season thanks in large part to Sophie Cunningham. I'm not stating that for dramatic effect, either. I'm not stating this to construct a narrative. I mean it literally. Without Sophie Cunningham on her squad, Caitlyn's physical bruising might have been far worse. Caitlyn had a billboard-sized target on her back from the very first WNBA game. And not the kind of goal that comes with having talent. Not the kind that results with being selected first overall. The kind that results from being too gifted, too noticeable, too well-liked, and too quick for a league that, to be honest, was unprepared for the upheaval her entrance brought about. She was smacked more forcefully than anyone else on the floor by other players. She was constantly having her hands checked. Extra force, extra elbows, and extra intent were being used to set the screens against her. Compared to what the rulebook should have permitted, contact was occurring much more frequently, higher, and later. Early in the season, Chindy Carter committed the now famous hard foul that made headlines across the country. There were the incessant elbows, constant schvies, and continual whistles being ignored by officials who turned a blind eye far more frequently than they should have for reasons that continue to spark debate in every online comment section. Sophie Cunningham took over at that point. Sophie wasn't looking for endorsement deals. She wasn't advocating for more time on camera. In an attempt to attract attention from businesses, she was not sharing highlights of her own plays. She was performing the bone-rattling, unglamorous, uncelebrated labor that never appears on a stat sheet. She was sending a strong message to the rest of the league that cheap shots on her teammates will result in penalties by throwing her own body into severe fouls. Any opposition player who swung at Caitlyn, either verbally or physically, would have to deal with her head-on. In the minds of opposing players, she was the guardian, the enforcer, and the unwritten insurance policy that made them reconsider dashing Caitlyn off a screen with malicious purpose. Sophie was there to ensure that it didn't happen again each time a blatant foul went uncalled and the officials swallowed their whistles. Sophie intervened between Caitlyn and whatever was coming her way each time a fight broke out on the court and tempers soared. Late in the season, Sophie committed a blatant foul of her own while protecting Caitlyn from what appeared to be a concerted attempt by the other team to make things tough. Afterward, she did not offer an apology. She refused to give up. She stated on camera that she would repeat the action. Everyone at home who watched knew she meant it. None of this was done for the media. She didn't do it for personal recognition or endorsement chances. She did it because she has always been a fierce competitor. She did it because she has always been that sort of teammate. Going all the way back to her time with the Phoenix Mercury prior to being traded to Indiana, as well as her collegiate days at Missouri. And Caitlyn saw. Every time, she saw it. She was paying attention, but she didn't discuss it much in public during the season because that isn't really her way. She was keeping tabs on everything and making plans in the background. This is the portion of the narrative that elevates the Nike moment to a whole new level, since it wasn't a random act of kindness. This was not a publicity gimmick that had been planned in some conference room. This player was plainly saying, "I see you," as she looked at the teammate who had stood watch over her on nights when the entire league seemed intended to break her, taken hits for her, and endured punishment. "I will make sure that everyone on the planet is aware of everything you have done for me." Caitlyn wasn't using a teleprompter when she remarked, "People talk about the plays that she makes, but Sophie makes the plays that nobody sees." She was speaking the honest, unvarnished, and unadulterated truth. And you just can't create that type of loyalty in a marketing meeting. You can't fake it. It cannot be scripted. You are unable to pay for it. Either it exists or it doesn't. This is where the tale expands beyond a single night and a single pair of sneakers. Because in the days that followed, Nike as a company had to make a decision. Option 1. They may handle the Sophie incident as a one-time, sentimental tale. After 48 hours of social media buzz, go to the next campaign cycle. Like every other famous athlete in their portfolio, stick to the original plan, which called for a standalone release of Caitlin Clark's distinctive shoes. Option 2. They may fully embrace what had just transpired. Instead of focusing on the individual, they might reframe their entire campaign around the partnership. You must comprehend Nike's current situation. The business had been witnessing the real-time explosion of women's sports. With 9.9 million viewers, the 2023 NCAA Women's Basketball Championship match between Iowa and LSU was the most watched women's collegiate basketball game in American history. Half of those televisions were on that evening because of Caitlin Clark. Indiana Fever season ticket sales had increased by more than 1,000% by the time she entered the WNBA draft in April of 2024. In cities where WNBA teams had never sold out a game in their history, road games were selling out. The Sophie moment did not seem like a good tale to Nike's marketing team. When they looked at it, they saw the most genuine brand story that could not be created from start by any advertising budget on the earth. They turned around as a result. Nike completely redesigned their Caitlin Clark campaign plan in a matter of days. One athlete and one signature shoe were no longer their exclusive offerings. They were offering something that is far more difficult to obtain in professional sports. A true tale. A tale of perseverance, trust, selflessness, and the kind of unbreakable friendship between two teammates who won't allow the media, the league, or the ongoing physical torture to separate them. Take a moment to consider Nike's past use of athlete narratives. Individual dominance was the foundation of the initial Michael Jordan campaign. The game-winning shot was made in slow motion by one guy versus the entire world. The killing mentality, the unwavering quest for individual greatness, and the readiness to outwork every single player in the gym were hallmarks of the Kobe Bryant era. Despite their brilliance, Serena Williams' campaigns pushed towards singular greatness in opposition to the globe. However, this was not the same. For the first time in its history, Nike was focusing on collaboration rather than individual celebrity when developing a significant signature campaign. And the fact that it wasn't made in a boardroom is exactly why it worked. It happened naturally on an Indianapolis stage when a 22-year-old rookie made a choice that no marketing team on the earth could have scripted. The ads were essentially self-written and created for one another. That became the slogan and the central theme of the rollout. Nike created little movies using actual footage from game days and fever practices. The silent times that are typically overlooked by cameras. During warm-ups for away games, Sophie would put herself between Caitlin and angry spectators. After a difficult defeat, the two of them would laugh together on the team bus. They used to stay up late after practice. Before heading home, it was just the two of them practicing pick-and-roll combos. Within hours of going live online, their co-branded items sold out.